"Sorry, Marcus, this is just for the office crew." Brad's voice had that fake apologetic tone that made my stomach turn. I stood there in the hallway of Thompson Digital Marketing, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder, watching as my coworkers gathered their things for the team happy hour. "But I am part of the office crew," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I've been on the team for 3 months now." Brad Thompson, our marketing director and team manager, gave me that smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes. At 35, he had that polished look of someone who'd never faced a real obstacle in his life. Perfect white teeth, expensive haircut, designer clothes that screamed, "I belong here." "We're going to be discussing some internal projects that you're not involved with yet. Maybe next time." He clapped a hand on my shoulder that felt heavier than it should have. "You understand, right?" Behind him, I could see Amber and Scott exchanging glances. Tara, the newest hire besides me, and notably the only other person who'd been with the company less than 6 months, was grabbing her purse, apparently invited without question. "Sure," I managed, forcing a smile. "No problem. Have fun." I watched them file out, laughing together about some inside joke. I wasn't stupid. This was the 3rd team gathering I'd been excluded from since joining Thompson Digital. The reasons always varied. Just for senior staff, planning session, for the Watson account. Small venue with limited space. Yet somehow, everyone else always made the cut. As I walked to my car in the near-empty parking lot, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my heart skip. "Dad." I slid into my car before answering. "Hey, Dad. Marcus. Son. Why weren't you at the dinner I paid for your team last night?" I specifically asked Brad to make sure everyone was there. I froze, my key halfway to the ignition. "What dinner?" "The reservation at Capitol Grill. I wanted to treat your whole department since the quarterly numbers were so strong. Brad told me he was taking everyone out for a team celebration. I transferred him $5,000 to cover it." The pieces clicked together in my mind. Yesterday's department meeting that I somehow wasn't included in. The way everyone had come in this morning talking about how amazing the steaks were. The knowing looks when Brad had announced another office crew happy hour today. "Dad, I wasn't invited." The words felt heavy leaving my mouth. I hadn't told my father about the subtle exclusions I'd been experiencing. William Richardson wasn't just any dad. He was the William Richardson, founder and CEO of Richardson Holdings, the parent company that had acquired Thompson Digital Marketing 6 months ago. And nobody at Thompson Digital knew I was his son. That had been our agreement when I graduated from business school. I wanted to make my own way, learn the business from the ground up without special treatment. Dad had reluctantly agreed, on the condition that I'd eventually join the executive team at Richardson Holdings. So I'd applied to Thompson Digital, under my mother's maiden name, Marcus Williams, with a resume that highlighted my education and internships but conveniently omitted my family connections. "What do you mean you weren't invited?" My father's voice had that dangerous calm I recognized from board meetings I'd sat in on. Brad specifically confirmed the headcount yesterday morning, 15 people. Our department had 16 employees, including me. "Must have been an oversight," I said, though we both knew better. There was a long pause on the line. "Marcus, is this the first time this has happened?" I considered lying, but what was the point now? "No, it's been challenging to fit in there." Another pause. "I see." Those 2 words contained multitudes. "So, are you at the office now?" "Just leaving. They're all going to happy hour at Westfield Tavern." "Without you?" "Yeah. I'll call you back." He hung up. I sat in my car, suddenly aware of the power I held. One word from me and Brad. Thompson would be out of a job by morning. The company my father had spent millions acquiring would be turned upside down. All I had to do was let Dad handle it. But that wasn't why I had taken this job. I wanted to prove myself, to understand the business from the front lines without my father's name opening doors. If I ran to Dad now, I'd never know if I could have succeeded on my own merits. As I sat there contemplating my next move, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Hi Marcus, this is Lisa from HR at Thompson Digital. Could you please return to the office? There's something we need to discuss regarding your employment." My stomach dropped. Was Brad so threatened by me that he was having me fired? Had someone discovered my connection to Richardson Holdings? I drove back to the office building, my mind racing. The security guard nodded as I badged back in. "Conference room A," he said before I could ask. "They're waiting for you." They. I walked through the quiet office, past the empty desks of my teammates, feeling like I was heading to my own execution. When I opened the door to conference room A, I wasn't prepared for what I found. Lisa from HR was there, looking uncomfortable. Next to her sat Janice Chen, our quiet data analyst who had declined the happy hour invitation, claiming she had work to finish. And at the head of the table sat a man I'd never seen before, tall, silver-haired, in an impeccable suit that probably cost more than Brad's monthly salary. "Marcus," the man said, standing and extending his hand. "I'm Robert Klein, General Counsel for Richardson Holdings." And just like that, my secret advantage was revealed. My father hadn't outed me. He'd sent his lawyer instead, a move that could protect my identity while still addressing whatever was happening. "Please, sit down," Robert said. "Ms. Chen has brought some concerning patterns to our attention, and we'd like to hear your perspective as well." Janice gave me a small, nervous smile. In the 3 months I'd worked here, we'd barely exchanged more than pleasantries. She kept to herself, ate lunch at her desk, and was invariably the first to arrive and last to leave. "What's going on?" I asked, taking a seat. Lisa cleared her throat. "Janice has filed a formal complaint about discriminatory practices within the marketing department, specifically regarding Brad Thompson's management style and team inclusion policies." I looked at Janice in surprise. She met my eyes steadily. "I've been documenting everything for 6 months," she said quietly. "The pattern became clear when you joined. I thought at first it was just me, because I'm—" She gestured to herself. "Not exactly the marketing type, but then you came along, and I started noticing similarities in how we were both being treated." Robert Klein slid a folder across the table. "Ms. Chen has provided extensive documentation showing a pattern of exclusion that appears to target employees based on demographic factors. The parent company takes these allegations extremely seriously." I opened the folder to find meticulous notes, screenshots of email invitations that omitted specific names, photos from company events showing the same faces again and again, while others were missing. My name appeared throughout the most recent entries. "I didn't know if you'd noticed it too," Janice said, "but when I heard you weren't invited to the dinner last night and then again today for happy hour, I couldn't stay quiet anymore." In that moment, I realized I had an ally I never knew existed. Janice hadn't seemed irrelevant to me, just quiet. But she'd been watching, documenting, building a case while I'd been trying to pretend everything was fine. "The company owner was quite disturbed to learn about this situation," Robert said carefully, giving me a meaningful look. "He's authorized me to take immediate action, but wanted me to consult with the affected parties first." I understood the subtext. My father was giving me a choice. Reveal myself now and watch Brad get fired on the spot, or handle this differently. "What kind of action?" I asked. "We could terminate Mr. Thompson's employment immediately," Robert said. "Or we could pursue a more educational approach. Your input would be valuable." I looked at Janice, who had been enduring this treatment longer than I had. "What do you think, Janice?" She considered for a moment. Firing Brad might feel satisfying, but it wouldn't fix the culture. Someone else would just take his place, maybe someone smoother about their biases. Her insight struck me as profound. "I agree," I said. "I think there's a better way to handle this." And with that decision, I discovered my true advantage. Not just my father's ownership of the company, but the opportunity to change things from within rather than simply seeking revenge. I had the chance to transform a toxic culture instead of just punishing one man. "I have an idea," I said, leaning forward, "but it's going to take some time and your continued discretion about my connection to Richardson Holdings." Robert nodded. "Mr. Richardson has given me full authority to support whatever approach you believe is best." For the first time since joining Thomson Digital, I felt truly empowered, not because of who my father was, but because I now had the chance to make meaningful change on my own terms. "Janice," I said, turning to my unexpected ally, "how would you feel about helping me with a special project?" She smiled, a real smile that transformed her usually serious face. "I thought you'd never ask." The next morning, I arrived at the office early, as was my habit. The difference was that today I came with a plan. Janice was already at her desk, nodding slightly as I walked in. On my desk was a sealed envelope with the Richardson Holdings logo. Inside was an official memo announcing a company-wide initiative on inclusive leadership, with Thompson Digital selected as the pilot department. The memo named me as project lead, with Janice as co-lead. Brad arrived at 9:30, looking slightly hungover. He stopped short when he saw the envelope on his desk matching mine. "Morning, Brad," I said pleasantly. "Sounds like you all had fun last night." He gave a non-committal grunt, tearing open the envelope. I watched his face as he read the contents, seeing the moment when he realized this wasn't a routine corporate communication. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, then looked up at me with new suspicion. "You're leading some corporate inclusion project? Since when?" I shrugged. "Just got the memo myself. Apparently, Richardson Holdings is implementing it across all subsidiaries, and they're starting with us as a test case. The CEO seems to think our department needs it." Brad's face flushed. "That's ridiculous. We have a great culture here." "Do we?" I asked mildly. "That's not what the employee satisfaction surveys indicate, apparently." That was a bluff. There had been no surveys, but Brad looked immediately defensive. "Those surveys are anonymous. How would they know which responses came from our department?" "I guess people were specific in their comments," I said. "Anyway, Janice and I will be scheduling one-on-one meetings with everyone this week to kick things off." "Janice?" "The data person." He looked over at her desk with a dismissive glance. "She has a master's in organizational psychology alongside her data analytics background," I said, another fact I'd just learned last night. Richardson Holdings specifically requested her expertise. Brad's posture changed subtly, the first hint of concern. "I should be leading this initiative as department head. The memo says it needs to be led by non-management staff to encourage honest feedback," I replied. "But you'll be heavily involved, of course. In fact, we have our first meeting with you today at 11. Robert Klein from corporate will be joining us." That name landed exactly as intended. Brad had met Robert at the acquisition meeting 6 months ago and knew exactly how much power the general counsel wielded. "Fine," he said tightly. "My calendar's open at 11. As he stalked to his office, I caught Janice's eye across the room. She gave me a tiny thumbs up. The first victory was small, but it felt significant. Brad Thompson, for perhaps the first time, couldn't exclude me from something important. Instead, I was in charge, and he had to follow my lead. At 11 o'clock, Brad sat uncomfortably in Conference Room B as Robert Klein explained the new Inclusive Leadership Initiative in corporate terms vague enough to sound legitimate while specific enough to make Brad sweat. "Our analysis shows concerning patterns in team cohesion and information sharing within this department," Robert said, referencing a professionally prepared presentation that he and I had put together last night. "The goal isn't to assign blame, but to create sustainable change." Brad shifted in his seat. "I run a tight ship here, but we're definitely inclusive. We just had a team dinner the other night." "Not the entire team," I pointed out. Brad shot me a look. "That was an oversight. An oversight that seems to happen repeatedly with certain team members," Janice added, sliding forward a folder. "This is data I've compiled on team events, email chains, and meeting invitations over the past 6 months. There's a statistically significant pattern of exclusion." Brad looked at the folder without opening it. "I'm sure you're misinterpreting things." Robert Klein leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, Richardson Holdings takes these matters extremely seriously. The CEO himself has expressed personal interest in this initiative and its outcomes at Thompson Digital." That statement, entirely true but deliberately misleading, had its intended effect. Brad's demeanor shifted from defensive to concerned. "Of course, we take it seriously, too," he said quickly. "I'm happy to support whatever changes you think are necessary." "Excellent," I said. "The first phase involves team restructuring. Janice and I will be co-leading the Watson account effective immediately." The Watson account was Thompson Digital's biggest client and Brad's personal pet project. The expression on his face was worth photographing. "That's my account," he protested. "I've built that relationship personally, and you'll still be involved in an advisory capacity," I assured him. but the CEO believes fresh perspectives will benefit the client. They've already been notified of the change. This was true. My father had personally called Watson's CEO this morning, positioning the change as an exciting enhancement to their service. Brad looked like he might explode but managed to contain himself. "Fine. When does this take effect?" "Immediately," Robert said. "Marcus and Janice will be meeting with the Watson team tomorrow morning. And there's one more thing," I added, pushing forward another document. "We'll need complete access to all departmental communications and records for the past year. As part of our audit." Brad went pale. "That's unnecessary, and some of those communications are sensitive, which is why only the project leads and corporate counsel will have access," Robert explained smoothly. The CEO was quite insistent on this point. After Brad left the meeting, looking shell-shocked, Robert turned to us with a slight smile. "Phase 1 accomplished. Are you sure you want to continue with this approach rather than simply replacing him?" I nodded. Firing Brad would be satisfying, but it wouldn't fix the underlying problems. This way, we can actually change the culture, while giving him a chance to either adapt or expose himself further. "Besides," Janice added, "there's something poetic about watching him squirm while we dismantle his little kingdom piece by piece." I looked at her with new appreciation. Behind that quiet exterior was a strategic mind and a healthy appetite for justice. Exactly. And we're just getting started. Over the next 2 weeks, Brad watched helplessly as Janice and I systematically reorganized the department. We restructured teams to break up the cliques that had formed. We implemented new communication protocols that ensured information was shared equally with all team members. And, most importantly, we began meeting directly with the Watson client, who was delighted with our fresh ideas and attentiveness. Brad tried to undermine us at first, sending emails to the client behind our backs and scheduling competing meetings. But each move was documented in Janice's growing file, and each attempt was countered by a polite but firm reminder from Robert Klein about the importance of supporting the initiative. The real turning point came when we discovered, through our audit of departmental records, that Brad had been misallocating client budgets, taking credit for work done by team members he later excluded, and, in some cases, charging clients for services that were never delivered. This wasn't just poor management. It was potentially fraudulent. "We've got him," Janice said as we reviewed the files late one evening. "This is enough to not just fire him but possibly press charges." I looked at the evidence, feeling a complex mix of emotions. "Let's not make a decision yet. I want to see how he handles the client presentation tomorrow." The presentation to Watson's executive team was a crucial milestone. Brad had insisted on attending, positioning himself as still being in charge despite our new roles. We had agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to observe his behavior in a high-stakes situation. What we didn't tell him was that my father would also be attending, introduced simply as William Richardson, CEO of the parent company, with no mention of our relationship. The morning of the presentation, the conference room was tense. Brad arrived overdressed and overprepared, clearly planning to take over the meeting despite our agreement that Janice and I would lead. The Watson executives filed in, followed. Lastly, by my father, whom Brad had never met in person. "Welcome, everyone," I began. "We're excited to share our new direction for the Watson campaign." Brad immediately jumped in. "As department head, I want to assure you that I've personally overseen every aspect of this strategy." My father caught my eye from across the table, one eyebrow slightly raised in a familiar expression that asked, "Is this what you've been dealing with?" I gave a nearly imperceptible nod and continued with the presentation. Every time Brad tried to interrupt or take credit, Janice or I would smoothly redirect, thanking him for his advisory input while making it clear who had actually done the work. By halfway through, Brad was visibly fuming when we revealed the campaign metrics showing significantly improved performance under our leadership compared to previous quarters. He finally snapped. "This is ridiculous," he burst out. "These improvements are due to groundwork I laid months ago. Williams here has barely been with the company 3 months, and he's trying to take credit for my work. This whole inclusion initiative is just a corporate political correctness stunt." The room went silent. The Watson executives looked uncomfortable. My Father's expression didn't change, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. "That's an interesting perspective, Mr. Thompson," my father said calmly, especially given that the data clearly shows performance improvements that correlate directly with the leadership change. Brad seemed to realize he'd made a tactical error but couldn't back down now. "With all due respect, Mr. Richardson, you don't understand the day-to-day realities of our work. Some people just fit better with certain clients and team dynamics than others. That's not about exclusion, it's about effective management." "And what exactly makes someone fit better?" my father asked, his voice deceptively mild. Brad hesitated, clearly searching for words that wouldn't dig his hole deeper. "Experience, skills, cultural alignment with the client." "Cultural alignment," my father repeated. "Interesting choice of words. Marcus, Janice, what's your assessment of this cultural alignment factor in the team's previous structure?" Janice spoke up, her voice steady. "Our data shows that team members excluded from key meetings and events shared no common factor. In terms of experience or skills, the only consistent patterns related to demographic factors unrelated to job performance." Brad's face flushed. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," I interrupted. "It's a data-based observation. The numbers don't lie, Brad." One of the Watson executives, a woman named Sarah, leaned forward. "I'm curious, what specific demographic factors were identified?" Janice pulled up a slide we had prepared, but hadn't planned to show. Team members who were consistently excluded from critical communications and events were predominantly women, people of color, or individuals who didn't participate in Brad's preferred social activities. The evidence was damning when presented so clearly. Brad looked around the room, suddenly aware that he was surrounded by people who now saw him for exactly what he was. "This is being blown completely out of proportion," he protested weakly. My father stood up. "Mr. Thompson, I believe we need to continue this conversation privately. Watson team, please excuse us for a moment. Marcus, Janice, please continue the presentation." As my father led Brad out of the room, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The man's career was effectively over, but this hadn't been about destroying Brad Thompson. It had been about exposing a systemic problem and creating the opportunity for real change. The rest of the presentation went flawlessly. The Watson team was impressed with our work and excited about the new direction. When they left, promising an expanded contract, Janice and I finally had a moment alone. "Do you think your father is firing him right now?" she asked quietly. I blinked in surprise. "You know?" She smiled. "I figured it out about a week ago. Same eyes, same way of tilting your head when you're thinking. Plus, the timing of the initiative, right after you were excluded from the dinner, was a pretty big clue. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it didn't matter," she said simply. "You were doing the right thing for the right reasons, regardless of who your father is. That's what counted." My father returned an hour later, alone. "Mr. Thompson has decided to resign. Effective immediately," he announced. "He'll be leaving the building today. Marcus, I'd like you to step in as interim department head while we conduct a proper search for a replacement." "Actually," I said, "I think Janice would be the better choice for interim lead. She has more experience with the company and clients, and she's already proven her leadership abilities." My father looked surprised but pleased. "Ms. Chen, would you be willing to take on that role?" Janice straightened up. "I would be honored, sir." "Excellent. We'll announce the changes this afternoon." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Marcus, I believe it's time we had that family dinner we've been postponing. Perhaps you could bring Ms. Chen as well. I have a feeling she'll be an important part of our company's future." 3 months later, Thompson Digital Marketing had been transformed. Under Janice's leadership, with me serving as her deputy, we had restructured the department to emphasize collaboration and inclusive decision-making. Team events now had 100% participation, not because anyone was forced to attend, but because everyone genuinely wanted to be there. My father had ultimately decided not to pursue legal action against Brad, on the condition that he complete an extensive professional development program on inclusive leadership. Whether it would change him personally was uncertain, but at least it would make him aware of his behaviors before he could damage another organization. As for me, my identity as William Richardson's son was now known throughout the company. But it had ceased to be the most interesting thing about me. I was judged instead by the quality of my work and the strength of my character, exactly what I had wanted all along. The true unexpected connection hadn't been my relationship to the company owner. It had been finding an ally in Janice when I thought I was fighting alone. It had been discovering that changing a culture requires patience, strategy, and collaboration, rather than swift retribution. My father and I still had our dinner plans. As Janice and I walked into the restaurant where he was waiting, I reflected on how differently things might have turned out if I had simply let him fire Brad that first day. "You know," Janice said, as if reading my thoughts, "most people in your position would have just had him fired immediately." "That would have been satisfying," I admitted, "but it wouldn't have changed anything fundamental. This way, we actually built something better. And that," my father said, rising to greet us as we reached the table, "is exactly why you'll make an exceptional leader someday. You understand that real power isn't about punishment. It's about transformation." As we sat down together, I realized that the true victory wasn't in Brad's downfall or even in my professional advancement. It was in creating a workplace where no one would ever again be told that something was just for the office crew, when what they really meant was something else entirely. The unexpected connection between Janice and me, between my father's position and my own merit, between justice and transformation. These were the threads that had woven together to create not just a moment of vindication, but a foundation for lasting change, and that was worth far more than the satisfaction of simple revenge.